comment on. Comment on tape by him. He comments on tape by her on him. Memory paragraph from W. Memory possibly with her voice as half. Possibly use her voice as half. Use of language is different as different as feelings. For example, W uses is. The one half inch DMZ between never violated. Postcards, horse and dark magical photographs. Sense of being layered, compressed, removed, compressed, removed. Barriers of others between her voice and his image. Some striking parts of his tape he doesn't comment on. For example, breaking play, throwing plates into the sea. She is Greek. How she used him, how he used her to understand his feelings. Used restraint from her brother's hand, some of him, mocking and hostility. What he imagines his image represents to her. What she represents to him. How what he did was formally different from what she did. Possibly freeze tape frequently when he comments. Also anticipate comment a particular scene. For example, the plate break, freeze on it when it comes saying, soon you'll see him wince and laugh, etc. Freezing on image described. Comment on how many and what scenes she repeats. Comment how many and what scenes she repeats. Stating that he did not repeat anything. Comment on what he adds as well as what she did not use. How familiar is always object between his women and the viewer. Compare faces in front of him, varying himself and him. DMZ again. How both use tape to work out feelings in different ways.
This is a tape I made.
This is a tape he made of a tape she made of a tape he made in her studio. This is a tape he made of a tape she made.
Sometime in December.
On screen is her tape of his tape. His tape is the last image in the background, which she rephotographed with other faces. This tape is of that. His tape was raw material. This tape on screen is raw material. Rephotographing his tape made it her work. Or commenting on it made it her work. Or both. She is heard but never seen. Nothing here has been rephotographed. Can it then be raw material? She suggested a dialogue. He was to make a tape, and she was to answer it, and he was to answer that. He made a tape which she used in her answer. She made an answering tape. He didn't rephotograph anything. In future, this tape may be raw material once again. This is a tape he made. He made it for her as much as one can make anything for another. This is the tape she used as raw material. This is the 7th such tape they have made in this way. It contains parts of all the others. The first tape was made with voices in front of the screen. She was not in the studio at the time it was made. Many things have been edited out. For example, she made a long tape of herself talking about work, which she withdrew from the dialogue. In one of the tapes, the one she made of the one he made of her, she suppressed his speech and to some extent his image behind commenting faces. She removed his presence from herself. In one of the tapes, one of the ones he made of etc., etc., he retained only the soundtrack of her voice and laid it in over his own image. He suppressed her image, but retained her voice undistorted. She removed his presence from herself. Sometimes she allowed him to mumble. That is done again and again. He uses the device of repetition far less as he finds it piques him. Piques him? That doesn't sound right, but it says that here in the text. On one of the tapes, she removed his presence from herself by converting his image into an icon. Here, for example, her voice asserts her presence while removing her emotionally from the scene. On one of the tapes, the 5th, She suppressed her image but allowed her to mumble, thereby removing her emotionally from his presence. The technique recalls Uccello's route at San Romano. That will become especially apparent in an excerpt from the third tape, where she uses freeze frame to stop the action of crowd scenes. He was opposed to this on the whole, but retained it out of deference to the spirit of the dialogue. There are no excerpts from the first tape. No, that's incorrect. At the end of this tape, the exact soundtrack from his first tape is used again as an ending, just as it has been used for an ending in each of the 7 tapes. He used the fourth tape to get at his, at that point, quite complicated feelings about her. Most of this was suppressed or distorted for the sake of art. On the whole, she used the times between the tapes for these purposes, a far more rational decision. But more of this later. Here is a sequence from the third tape where, at the time, inspiration was at a fever pitch. Later on, morality was to enter the picture. That shouldn't be taken literally. No tape was ever made about morality as such, although the 6th has its moments. They did to one another what people do to each other. She compressed him into an object. He projected onto her a landscape of his feelings. That is a direct quote from the second tape when they both agreed that figure-ground relations were... Text is illegible at this point. In this tape, he's attempting to confront an unrehearsed situation. Awkward that. Why not say he is in an unrehearsed situation? His strategy was that in his anxiety to function without a preset structure, he would reduce or avoid performing presence. You can judge that for yourself from what is going on. We have it on record from several expert eyes who observed this sequence, as well as having questioned him afterwards, that he was simply farting in the wind, didn't have a leg to stand on, that sort of thing. While there have been 7 tapes made to date, he admitted to having made 9 takes of 30 minutes, each in the attitude in which you see him. Back to camera, lighting cigar, LL Bean shirt, and all the rest. He then edited...
I have to warn you about the end. It's really sentimental. It's all about phones ringing and empty walls and me backing out of the picture. Left it in anyway. It's all about this absence thing where the telephone's ringing. She keeps saying, the telephone is ringing, the telephone is ringing, and I slowly back out of the frame like this. I'll do it, so you'll see what it's going to be like, and I'll be the telephone as well as her voice. I'm standing here like this. Nothing's happening. Telephone rings. She says the telephone is ringing. I slowly start moving back. Ring. Telephone is ringing. Ring. Telephone is ringing. Ring. Takes forever. Telephone is ringing. Ring. And finally I'm gone, and it's just a blank wall. And it keeps on ringing, and she keeps saying the telephone is ringing.
He then edited out moments which he felt were the most unrehearsed appearing. Awkward that. Why not say which appeared most unrehearsed? In the opinion of several expert eyes who questioned him afterwards, this amounted to rehearsing, if not to something worse. After endless questions put to him by expert eyes, most of which were boring, I can tell you, he submitted the following written statement. No. Here I am, commenting on my performance, trying to feel my way back to feelings which escaped me as I merely lived through that time. But this involves her, and that is another story. Can you believe that he wrote such a thing? Here we can see what she did with these sort of remarks. This is from the 4th tape. It is plain to see that she has calmly ignored these scraps of scribbled paper which he passed to her onto the television monitor. How much time do we have left? 15 minutes? No, 13. Those brief images of racing cars, hopelessly device-like, are preparations for some rather touching remarks Sterling Moss made before his death at Monza in 1953. He insisted on leaving this in spite of several remarks from those expert eyes mentioned above. The remarks come later. You can see from what is going on, this is her 3rd tape, by the way, that she is well into the medium. She has removed him from her presence. She is getting it on with all the static and the mumbling. She's hit her stride. quite admirable considering the humble origins of all this. It went something like this. She suggested a dialogue. He said yes and immediately asked to use her equipment. There were long discussions as to where this was to take place. Decisions were made and then reversed. Some weeks later, she told him she had felt invaded by his presence. She said in a note pasted to the front of the monitor then, but I'll quote, "By now I know who I want to sleep with, but lending my equipment is something else."
The figure that's not on the screen right now.
When she questioned him closely about the level of hostilities, this was around the time of the third tape, in the midst of the sequence recalling the rout at San Romano. He replied, "Hostility is one of the few things we have left."
Ron Gardner.
You can see in this sequence from the sixth tape how she has removed him from her presence. I won't say that again. In the first tape, he tried to get at his feelings, gave it up in the second tape, toyed with it in the third, went into a rage in the fourth, mumbled incoherently in the fifth, and returned, greatly cleansed, to the subject in the seventh. I can't recall what he did with the sixth. She speaks for herself. Here you can see that she has hit her stride. He stalks, she strides. Actually, he stalked and she strode. She insisted that I say this, and I do it reluctantly, but it is her tape, or rather, this sequence is hers. Generally, she speaks for herself. He attempted to talk about continuity in the fourth take after the rage had passed. Yes, I'm getting to the story. Narrative tone. He had gone to Italy. It'll be better in the first person, even though it is his. I had gone to Italy to get away from her. It was after that trouble with the rout at San Romano. One gray winter afternoon, I went from Venice to Padua to see Donatello's equestrian monument of Gattamelata, which stands in the Piazza del Santo. I did not have a map of the city. I do not speak Italian. Armed with these disadvantages, I was determined to get to this monument on public transportation. Several times I took the wrong turn, and it was getting on toward dusk. I found myself on a bus, God, what English, which I assumed was going in the right direction. A woman got on loaded with packages. I gave her my seat, and in my best non-Italian asked, "Dove San Antonio?" I've lost the narrative tone. After several minutes of that sort of communication, which led Wittgenstein to abandon the notions of clarity he held in the Tractatus, I felt somehow that we were to get off at the same stop. She rose, began gesturing wildly, and I moved with her toward the door. She was too late to the exit, and the bus moved on past the stop. I shrugged my shoulders in an expression of what I hoped would be taken to mean, "Sorry, well, you know, buses, sympathetic, let me help out with the packages." We had by then lurched to the next stop. The door suddenly opened, and the woman fell out of the bus, spilling her packages all over the street. She was unhurt except for a skinned shin. I helped her collect her shopping while wondering if the maniacal pursuit of art had not always led me, in one way or another, to cause harm to women. She pointed upward and to the left, picking up her packages, and exited right. We'd stopped dead in front of the Piazza del Santo, and the Gattamelata loomed directly above me, high on its pedestal. By now, it was after 6 and quite dark. There were no lights in the square, and as I looked up at the object of my pilgrimage, how stilted. I saw nothing but a black, hulking shape vaguely silhouetted against the night sky. I stared up, trying to remember the photographs in Jansen. I went into the church and bought some postcards of the Gattamelata and carefully studied them. Truly, it was a great work. I sent her a postcard with the words, "Cycles and circles, repetition and self-reference, objects in front of behavior, the original hobby horse of art." Anyway, it's a horse with 3 balls, if not of a different color. Work, thought, process, self. And thought, work, process, the other. Best regards.
Artist R. Rolls.
It was around the time of the sequence now on screen, her fourth tape, his third, the lag being due to the character of the dialogue, statement, reply, etc. But I explained all that. I'll not say this again. It was around the time of the sequence now on screen, her fourth tape, his third, that he had become obsessed with her face. Heavy-lidded eyes, full mouth, altogether dark and exotic countenance. That he was having dreams about her face. That ever since the rout at San Romano, he could think of nothing but her face.
Artists are
Why don't you talk about work? She suggested in a note pasted to the editing head of the Sony 3600. He was grateful she had not suggested a cold shower. I won't look at you when I talk about work, he said.
The queen bees, too.
I know it's hard to believe, but he actually made that statement. I'll throw away all those tapes, especially the second and fourth, which have my face in them, she said, kicking in a monitor to show her determination. But I invent. It happened quite differently, but since none of the tapes dealing with this delicate matter of desire, not to mention matters dealing with the delicate release of these delicate desires, have survived, we should confine ourselves to the tape now in progress. This is composed largely of his dubbing in her faceless voice over his mute image. Such were the formal devices resorted to in those days. Crude as these were, they succeeded in removing the presence of the one, him say, from the presence of the other. If before him, then now her, say. This is clearly borne out by the sequence now on screen. The cutting back and forth between these 7 tapes is intended. But I must interject here that if 7 complete tapes now exist, some 14 were made, not counting the 6 he made, which were reviewed by expert eyes and found wanting. Simple addition then yields some 21 tapes, more or less. These were alternately finished tapes and subsequently raw material as the dialogue blossomed. The present tape, however, is an exception, being an anthology, which explains the apparent error in my edition for those who cared to add along. But to return to, or perhaps descend to, a somewhat formal level of the cutting back and forth, the excerpting of the 3rd tape, skipping to a peek at the 5th, etc., do we not glimpse some attempt on their part to suit the form to the content? Does he not cautiously move around her? Does she not warily move around him? Feints and parries. It's hopeless, I admit, but I'm just the narrator. I'll try for another tone, another voice. They move around one another, constantly circling about the tapes which stand between them. Feelings of love and anger are absorbed by the blotter of art. His image, her voice. They are cautious and attentive. 2 wolves eyeing each other across a carcass. You're going to have to get someone else to read this. I can't speak this one. In the dream, he was dressed as a stormtrooper, and she had 4 faces. He touched the photograph. Your hands are like ice, he said. They're always like that in the photograph, she replied. I brought you the 4th tape, he said, offering 2 handfuls of tangled tape. Good, she replied. Put it in the editing bowl. You take the vinegar and I'll do the oil. After the rout at San Romano, there was a certain reconciliation. Certain overtones of a rapprochement are evident in the present sequence. Somehow his heart went out to her after she had sent him the following card from Buffalo. Like every other artist whose psyches are dominated by the narcissistic, charm can be exuded, the risky need for love hinted at, but it is admiration that we wish to compel from one another. As I circle these tapes from one side, you from the other, the carcass between us. Best regards. It is my sincere hope in citing such data that I am not being taken as driving on toward a style, but am rather slowly changing direction, finding another voice, another tone, turning a corner, as it were. But forget this and look at the tape. First viewing of 3rd tape, 1/12/73. She making faces while he's serious. Quote, but I'm very tired of all that. Very good, keep that in and repeat throughout. Also the following. I never assume any continuity. And I didn't know you were that violent. Also, I have a temptation to tell stories to get out from under all this. I wanted to bury you. And spare, remote. Animals? Her layered images, stories, one short Guatemala. Voice continues over stills of racing cars. This was the worksheet for what has so far been used with the 3rd tape. Second viewing of 3rd tape, 1/15/73. Hand gesture at sets up something like humor. Part discussing strategy, folding back, etc. use as is. Cut to still image of back. Quote, but I never assume any continuity. Sounds of dishes during, before, breaking plate. Sequences of stills at words, it's looser, amusing. Repeat sound of breaking plate. Two Porsches at South Turn at Le Mans, making up something about red bricks. Second got him a lot of story. Quote, this is an interesting dialogue. Best regards. The phone is ringing. I will tell a story. This was the worksheet for editing out undesirable parts of the third tape. Interspersed 3 or 4 times. No one has ever counted the dark red paving stones on the banked north curve of the Avis, but all who have raced there know its dangers.
I can't remember which
If
one.
that, then perhaps the following during her 5th tape, after the part agreed upon. Fractions of a second later, the driver's fall was broken by the acacia bushes which grew at the rear of the banking, whilst the car dropped into the pits area. The 2 center top pictures show that some of the people there had not yet even noticed what had happened, whilst some others came running with fire extinguishers to save him. No one knew at that moment that he was not in the car. All efforts to save the wreck, now burning with poisonous white magnesium flames, were in vain. Suddenly, in the midst of this commotion, someone bellowed, "Here he is," and they found him hanging from an acacia bush. Here you see him in the 7th tape, the one in which he returned to his feelings. He's talking about how little was left of them by this time. Something about the effort of art wringing it out of him. We've spared you that, edited it out. In the end, he came around. Agreed there was no use going on with it. After the unexpected rage from the 5th tape, he said he felt differently about the whole enterprise, whatever he meant by enterprise. It doesn't pay to question him closely. Anyway, we've spared you that. After the 6th tape, that trouble with the route at San Romano, he was forever trying to convince everyone around him to mumble. Off-screen or on, it was the same thing. He would stand there in the unheated room, as you see him now, mumbling. Didn't mind the cold, it seemed. She once touched him and said, "Your hands are like ice."
My cat just jumped in.
Later on, during the 7th tape, he preferred to stand there alone. This sequence shows him the way he was found one day. Standing there, alone, cold to the touch, mumbling. Tape had run out long ago, snow on the monitor. Winter day, plastic flapping at the window. Standing
It's
there.
only through a kind of continuity that one can change and grow.
Forget all that. It's what's going on here. The layers in the 3rd tape, which is running now. Count them. Closest is my voice. That is to say, a voice. Someone's. Beneath that, her voice from the 4th tape.
Is Marilyn
Her image is absent. He wanted it that way.
It's a way of going
Beyond these 2 verbal layers, a face to the right belonging to one knows not what.
my brother?
That's the tone I was trying for before.
in order to clear out your mind.
Occasionally it speaks a word or 2. Beyond that face and to its left, another darker face whose immobility and impassivity, together with its incoherent speech, cause one to wonder at its affliction. At the end of this tunnel of layers, a somewhat more mobile figure displaying a certain urgency. The term is too strong. He speaks, but blurred images leave his mouth. I'm not sure of that metaphor.
Weaving
Let us say that, in a word, he mumbles,
underneath my studio.
lowering cycles and circles. Dante can't be far behind. What terror led to the production of these demented mumblers? Why the necessity to dub in this spastic verbalization in the background beneath her voice? Let her answer that on about the 23rd tape. Who is this female narrator describing the irrelevant labors of Arachne in her basement? Is she some sort of Stygian jailer assigned to keep watch over those who stammer and weave? It's suddenly thick with the classics. What threats are here suppressed? But the question at hand is why she silenced that figure in the distance with her droning comments, flanked him with these paralyzed guardian faces who relay his words to her through their speech defects. We are witnessing a situation of terror in which a disembodied voice, say hers, keeps an image, if first hers, then say his, at bay.
It's a way of sort of searching around. kind of oscillating back and
The intentions of the first tapes are lost, stripped, bent, folded over, stuffed in, pulled out. You know what I mean. They've been overcome by the filth of honest work. The term is too strong. He returned to his feelings in the seventh, but by then, nothing.
At one point, it rocks
Not
back
a
and
twinge.
forth a bit. I don't know why.
She, on the other hand, used the time between the third and the fifth, never on the third or fifth,
Just talking.
for a more rational analysis.
Kind of pressure to
The fifth of hers is coming up shortly, and I think my words will be worn out.
profile.
He, on the other hand, being less rational, began to feel the drift at the sixth. It was momentum pulling at him. At first, he resisted. See him lean slightly to the left. He drifted slowly to a stop. Loved to freeze the frame here and be done with it.
Production.
Found himself standing there, mumbling in the cold. More of that later, toward the end.
It's really sentimental.
The figure off
It's all
screen
about-
said
From now on, you must watch carefully. We're going to pull things apart carefully.
Me backing out
The
of
words of the great former Sterling Moss.
the phone was ringing.
The drift is the type of turn made with certain machines under certain conditions.
telephone's ringing.
Essentially, it is changing directions at fairly high speed. It is accompanied by the discrete use of oversteer.
Out in the frame.
Approaching the curve, one allows the rear of the car to skid outward away from the direction of the turn. One downshifts well before the center of the curve and accelerates forward to overcome the lateral forces pulling the car sideways. It is of the utmost importance to keep power as well as control in changing directions in this way.
The figure that's not
There is a soft feeling at the beginning of the drift,
my brother.
as if time had stopped,
Plays football.
as if the machine had given up and was floating breathlessly toward the embankment. Then, at the precise instant, acceleration carries the car forward once again and away from its disastrous sideward momentum.
Ron Garchoff.
On the straightaway, once again, one recalls this purposeful lack of control to which the machine was subjected in order to move it through a difficult change of direction while maintaining all possible speed. It is a dangerous but controlled form of transition which must become instinctive.
Another way to come to a stop, actually. One eye.
We are approaching the end, running out of things to say, running out of tapes to splice together, words to dub, images to blur. This has been about love and competition. No, it's been about forgetting.
The phone is
No.
ringing in the other room.
Nothing of the sort appears on screen.
And I react.
Perhaps it's been about driver education. It's been about them, whoever they were, working out their feelings. That's a laugh. Better stop right here. Whose tape is this right now? Back to the camera, mumbling. There are mornings when one wakes up to absolutely hating the world. Then there are the times when one wakes up to one's body washed by waves of light, glowing there before the first motion. Occasionally I have to admit it. Need subsides as though one never knew desperation, and one's aloneness is sufficient. No one was weaving off screen except her, that voice, at her machine for weeks to produce this tape, weaving the images on top of her feelings, over and under. And him? No, not a weaver. A singer, 29 years old and left-handed. But she wove. She wove him into a tapestry. Weaving. It was something to think about while she talked. No, she never talked. She mumbled. No, that was the weaving. The warp or the woof, I can never remember. I was the warp, the mumbling, the woof. Wonderful words, those. Seem more like Arctic terms for obscure sled dog commands. No matter, warp and woof. English can be proud of them. Well, to get on with it, to explain a process. No, better to show a process like the rest of them. Well, I haven't the stomach for it anymore. Warp and woof. If he is the warp and then mumbled, he would have been warp and woof. Forget that. Look at him, at those blurred edges, those dots everywhere. Evidence of the weaver's craft. If he is the warp, then those faces must be the woof. He is warped, they woof. They woof at his warp. This gets worse, but we're near the end. Forget that. Look at the figures. I'll tell you about what happened off screen, the good parts. I have inside information. She paced the floor. She worried, threaded a tape, unraveled it again. Quick, too, at her machine. Flashing hands is too trite, but I'll think of something later. A face in, a voice out. A voice over, a face under. This went on for weeks until his presence was imprisoned within the spider web of faces and mumbles. No, forget that. What you see here has nothing to do with what went on off screen, I can tell you that. Weeks of pacing needed to get this thing together. They paced in separate rooms, she on the east-west axis, he on the north-south. Now that's one solid fact that went on outside this. I'll think of others. I'll make up others. I'm quick with a phrase. Not a flashing quickness like her hands, but I get by. But look at him. He had a name, or he professed a purposeful air. How is it possible to profess a purposeful air? One question might be asked. In his singularity, does he weave? Rather, did he weave before she got hold of him? No, I must be fair. I've never been fair. When he wasn't standing there acting the fool, sucking on that cigar, it was even worse, I can tell you. I have inside information. Slack mouth, glazed eyes, staring into space, wondering what to do next, forgets to pace, cigar goes out, ear itches, forgets to scratch. No, I make it out worse than it was. No, don't soften the blows. Tell the truth. I've never told the truth. Best to observe him. What's he saying? Something about work. Work? He never worked in his life. That's obvious, or he would have something to say. What's that he says? Never assumes any continuity? That's heavy. Tie that to your shuttlecock. A lot to be squeezed out of that phrase. I've lost the thread. He never actually met that voice, so he claimed. It was all done by mail, a dialogue in correspondence. Awkward that, why not say a dialogue by mail? And he wanted me to add in closing that those countless red paving stones on the north curve of the Avis, well, you knew it all along. There was a large sign, a billboard on which was painted a woman's face, short hair, heavy-lidded eyes, full mouth. The lower photograph shows him at the top of the turn, waving, and at a point where he most needed both hands on the wheel. He waved to her as he sped past. Why not simply say went past?
I think I was fairly old when I said that. At one point, I rocked back and forth a bit. I don't know why I had a rock in my... All that absence, all that telephone ringing. Another way it could have come to a stop, actually, one I myself prefer a bit, is to have my back to the camera, as I did previously when the plate broke. Now off screen, somebody breaks a plate. I'll have to do the plate breaking here. And I react, just as though each time I hadn't expected it. So I'm standing here, this is the end. Crash! 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 Now a slow fade, and the thing keeps going. Crash! 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 It's better, isn't it? People
I don't think I ever worked with an analyst.
Talk. And then they gain...
Dialogue, comment, mumbling, what's left? Alone on the stairs, winter day, going up or coming down? Can't remember. No one was ever weaving downstairs. Checked on that. Remember the grain of the stairs. Brass nails in the middle of each tread. No, that's not on the tape. No clarity. Pushed out of it all now. At the time it was discussed. Nerves raw, each gesture reverberated. Care was taken. One step at a time. One foot in front of another. No, It was one brick at a time. Slowly, they built the wall. One tape on top of the other. Close-up of the red bricks.
Figure in the middle.
No, that was edited out.
See now.
No north turn and no paving
It's
stones.
not there at all.
Those are his very words off the 5th tape before the mumbling set in. Droning on, standing there in the dark, cold to the touch. Who spoke first? Not I. She said, go on, don't stop. Always was a talker, that one. Faces around him, but they never answered. Just his voice like a drill in the head. After a while, no attempt to understand. Both of them standing there in the dark, droning on. Who spoke? Did he speak? Was it she? I speak their voices, standing here in their pauses. No, I remember. We stood there in the dark, fire blazing, feeling it slip away.
All that ad something, all that telephone ring.